They say death comes in many forms across the galaxy. Some civilizations worship it. Others flee from it. But humanity? Humanity perfected it. When the Zephyrian Empire first encountered humans, they laughed at our primitive weapons and slow reflexes. When they captured our colonies, they thought us weak prey. When they sent their most elite death squads to finish what they started, they expected easy victory. They were wrong about everything. What they didn't understand was that humans had been killing each other for millennia before we reached the stars. We had turned warfare into an art form, brutality into science, and survival into instinct. And among all humans, there existed a breed apart. Warriors forged in the crucible of Earth's deadliest conflicts, trained to be living weapons. The aliens were about to learn why humans call them Navy SEALs. This is the story of Marcus Ghost Rodriguez, and the day he reminded the galaxy that when it comes to death, humans wrote the manual. Marcus Rodriguez had been dead for exactly 7 minutes and 32 seconds when the Zephyrian boarding party found his body floating in the vacuum of space. At least, that's what their scanners told them as they dragged his lifeless form aboard their assault cruiser Shadowfawn. The aliens congratulated themselves on eliminating another human pest, completely unaware that they had just invited death itself onto their ship. The Shadowfawn was a predator vessel, sleek and deadly, designed specifically for hunting down human colonies that had escaped the initial Zephyrian invasion. Its crew consisted of the Empire's most elite warriors, the Void Hunters. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, their crystalline exoskeletons gleaming with built-in weaponry. They were engineered killers, bred for one purpose: to exterminate humanity. Commander Zach Th examined the human corpse with mild interest as his crew secured it in the ship's interrogation bay. The creature was smaller than he had expected, perhaps 6 feet in height, with darker skin and what appeared to be decorative markings covering its arms. Unlike most humans they encountered, this one wore no standard military uniform. Instead, he was dressed in a strange black suit that seemed to absorb light. Pathetic, Zach Th hissed, his translator rendering the words in harsh, guttural tones. To think the High Command considers these mammals a threat to the Empire. Look at it, so fragile, so weak. A single plasma bolt, and it dies like any other animal. His lieutenant, Zernox, nodded in agreement while running detailed scans of the body. The bioreadings confirm it, Commander. This specimen appears to have been floating in space for several cycles. Probably ejected from one of the colonies we destroyed last week. What neither alien realized was that Marcus Rodriguez had been holding his breath for exactly 7 minutes and 32 seconds. It was a technique he had learned during his early SEAL training, refined through years of underwater demolitions, and perfected during his time fighting the insurgents on Kepler 442b. The human body, when properly prepared and conditioned, could survive in the vacuum of space for far longer than most aliens believe possible. As the Zephyrians debated whether to dissect him immediately or keep him for the scientists back on their homeworld, Marcus was conducting his own reconnaissance. Through barely opened eyelids, he cataloged everything: the ship's layout, the number of crew members visible, their weapons, their positions, and, most importantly, their weaknesses. The Void Hunters were impressive specimens, he had to admit. Their exoskeletons looked tough, probably rated for small arms fire. Their weapons were energy-based, likely plasma rifles, judging by the distinctive humming sound they made. Most telling of all was their behavior. They moved with the confidence of apex predators who had never encountered anything capable of fighting back effectively. That was about to change. Marcus had been part of SEAL Team 6 for 12 years before humanity reached the stars. He had fought in every major conflict of the 22nd century, from the water wars of Earth to the colonial uprising on Mars. When the Zephyrian Empire began their systematic extermination of human settlements, Marcus had been among the first volunteers for the new Deep Space Reconnaissance Division. His mission was simple: infiltrate enemy vessels and gather intelligence on their capabilities. What Command hadn't told him was that this particular mission was one way. The Shadowfawn had been hunting human survivors for months, appearing without warning to destroy fleeing colony ships. Standard military tactics had proven useless against their advanced technology. So the Admiralty had decided to try something different. They would send in a single operator, someone trained to think outside conventional warfare parameters. They chose Marcus because he was the best at what he did. And what he did wasn't very nice. The alien ship's atmosphere was breathable, though it tasted metallic and carried an underlying scent of ozone. Marcus remained perfectly still as the Zephyrians continued their examination, using every second to plan his next moves. He counted at least 15 crew members in his immediate vicinity, with probably 3 times that number throughout the ship based on its size. The specimen shows signs of enhanced muscular development, Zernox reported, running some kind of scanner over Marcus's arms and torso. Unusual scarification patterns as well. Perhaps this one was a warrior of some kind. Commander Zach TH laughed, a sound like grinding glass. A warrior? These humans know nothing of warfare. They fight with crude projectile weapons and simple explosives. No honor, no skill. They are little more than clever animals. If Marcus had been conscious according to their scans, he might have smiled at that assessment. The Zephyrians had clearly never encountered a properly trained human special forces operator. They understood conventional warfare, certainly. Their technology was superior, their military doctrine sound for fighting other conventional forces. But they had never faced an enemy trained in asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, and improvised combat techniques. The first mistake they made was leaving him unrestrained. Apparently, they couldn't conceive of a dead body posing any threat. The second mistake was storing his corpse in their interrogation bay, which Marcus quickly realized doubled as their primary weapons locker. The third and most critical mistake was underestimating exactly how much damage a single motivated human being could inflict when properly applied. Marcus had been trained to wait for the perfect moment. In the mountains of Afghanistan, that might have been when a target moved into an optimal firing position. On the underwater demolition missions, it was when the tide was just right and security was at its lowest. Here, aboard an alien warship surrounded by enemies, the perfect moment was when the maximum number of crew members were present and their attention was focused elsewhere. That moment came when Commander Zach TH called for a full crew assembly to witness the dissection of their human prize. Marcus listened as heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors, as excited chatter filled the air, as the aliens gathered to watch their commander carve up another member of the species they were systematically exterminating. Through his tactical awareness, Marcus counted 37 distinct heartbeats in the room. 37 targets. The weapons locker contained what appeared to be energy rifles, some kind of blade weapons, and several devices he didn't recognize but which probably exploded when triggered properly. More importantly, he had identified the ship's critical systems through careful observation of the crew's movements and conversations. The aliens had made one more crucial error. They assumed that human technology was primitive compared to their own. They were right, in a sense. Human weapons were less advanced, human ships slower, human armor weaker. But humans had learned something during their violent history that the Zephyrians, despite their technological superiority, had never needed to master. Humans had learned to be creative with killing. When Commander Zach TH raised his scanning device to begin the dissection, Marcus opened his eyes and spoke his first words in the alien language he had been studying from their transmissions during his approach. You know, he said conversationally, where I come from, we have a saying, if you're not dead, you're not done. The effect was immediate and spectacular. 37 alien warriors, each trained from birth for combat, each armed and armored, froze in complete shock at the sound of a voice from a corpse that had been confirmed dead by their most advanced sensors. Marcus used that moment of paralysis to accomplish 3 things simultaneously. First, he rolled backward off the examination table, putting the metallic surface between himself and the majority of the weapons in the room. Second, he grabbed what appeared to be some kind of plasma cutter from the nearby tool rack. Third, and most importantly, he triggered the small device he had been concealing since before his death, a gravitational pulse grenade of human manufacture. The device wasn't designed to kill. Instead, it created a localized disruption in artificial gravity systems, something the aliens relied on heavily aboard their ships. Suddenly, 37 Zephyrian warriors found themselves floating helplessly in zero gravity, their heavy exoskeletons becoming liabilities rather than assets. Marcus, who had trained extensively in zero-G combat, moved through the chaos with lethal precision. The plasma cutter in his hand hummed to life, and he discovered with professional satisfaction that it cut through alien armor just as effectively as it did through metal plating. The first alien died before it even realized what was happening. The second managed to raise its weapon before Marcus's improvised blade opened its throat. The third actually got off a shot, but plasma bolts are difficult to aim accurately when you're spinning uncontrollably through the air. By the time the ship's emergency gravity systems kicked in 30 seconds later, Marcus had eliminated 12 of the 37 crew members and positioned himself behind the weapons locker with a full arsenal of alien technology to examine. The remaining 25 Void Hunters regrouped quickly. He had to give them credit. These were professional soldiers, trained to adapt to unexpected situations. But as they began to coordinate their response, Marcus was already implementing the second phase of his plan. From his position behind cover, he called out in their own language, "My name is Marcus Rodriguez, Master Chief Petty Officer, United Earth Navy SEALs. I am here to deliver a message from the human race." Commander Zactach, still alive and now furious rather than shocked, snarled back, "What message, human filth?" Marcus armed one of the alien grenades he had found, estimated its blast radius based on its construction, and smiled grimly. "The message is simple, Commander. When you hunt humans, sometimes the prey hunts back." The grenade detonated with devastating effect in the confined space. Marcus had positioned himself to minimize his exposure while maximizing the impact on the alien forces. When the smoke cleared, only 8 Zephyrians remained combat effective, including Commander Zactach himself. But Marcus was just getting started. This was what he had trained for his entire adult life, being outnumbered, outgunned, and expected to win anyway. The aliens thought they were apex predators, but they had never encountered a human who had made killing into an art form. As he moved through the ship's corridors with alien weapons in hand, and the element of surprise still partially on his side, Marcus began to understand something that would prove crucial to humanity's eventual victory over the Zephyrian Empire. These aliens, for all their technological superiority and physical advantages, had never learned to be afraid. Fear was something humans lived with every day, something that taught them to be cautious, creative, and utterly ruthless when cornered. The Zephyrians fought like machines, efficient, logical, predictable. Marcus fought like something much more dangerous. He fought like a human being with nothing left to lose, and a very specific set of skills that were about to become extremely relevant. The hunt was about to begin, and for the first time in their lives, the Void Hunters were going to learn what it felt like to be prey. The corridors of the Shadow Fong were designed to intimidate. Smooth metallic walls curved overhead, creating a tunnel-like effect that made intruders feel trapped and claustrophobic. Bioluminescent strips provided minimal lighting, casting everything in an eerie blue glow that played tricks on the eyes. For the Zephyrians, this environment was perfect for psychological warfare against their usual prey. Marcus Rodriguez had spent 3 years fighting in the underground tunnel networks of Europa's ice cities. This felt like home. He moved through the ship's ventilation system with the silence of a ghost, having abandoned the main corridors after his initial confrontation. The alien ship's environmental systems were remarkably similar to human designs in their basic principles, though the execution was more sophisticated. More importantly, for Marcus's purposes, they were large enough to accommodate his frame and connected to every major section of the vessel. Behind him, he could hear Commander Zactach coordinating the search with the remaining crew members. The alien commander had shown remarkable composure after losing most of his warriors, quickly adapting his tactics to hunt for a single infiltrator. Marcus had to respect the professionalism, even as he planned to kill every one of them. "Seal all blast doors," Zactach's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "The human cannot have gone far. Deploy hunter-killer protocols and sweep every section. This vermin will not escape the Shadow Fong." What the commander didn't understand was that Marcus had no intention of escaping. His mission parameters were clear. Gather intelligence on Zephyrian capabilities, identify weaknesses in their technology and tactics, and if possible, eliminate high-value targets. The crew of an elite Void Hunter vessel definitely qualified as high-value targets. Through a ventilation grate, Marcus observed 2 aliens moving through what appeared to be the ship's engineering section. They moved with military precision, covering each other's flanks and checking corners methodically. Their weapons were raised and ready, energy cells glowing with deadly potential. These weren't panicked amateurs. They were adapting to the threat he represented. That adaptability would have to be factored into his approach. Marcus had taken several items from the weapons locker during his escape. 2 plasma rifles, a bandolier of what appeared to be energy grenades, some kind of molecular blade that cut through nearly anything, and, most interestingly, a device that his training suggested was a personal shield generator. He had also discovered something the aliens probably hadn't intended him to find. Their tactical communication network operated on frequencies his enhanced hearing could detect. Human genetic modification had come a long way since the early colonial period. SEALs received the best enhancements available: improved reflexes, enhanced sensory capabilities, increased muscle density, and accelerated healing. Nothing that would make him superhuman, but enough to give him an edge against opponents who didn't know what they were facing. The 2 aliens below were discussing their search pattern in their native language. Marcus had been listening to their communications for hours now, and his linguistic implants were beginning to parse the grammar and vocabulary. Military terminology translated fairly directly between species, it seemed. Human demonstrates advanced combat capabilities beyond standard intelligence estimates. Recommend upgrading threat assessment to level 7. Commander Zach TH requests immediate notification upon contact. Level 7. Marcus filed that information away. If their threat assessments were anything like human military doctrine, that suggested they now considered him equivalent to a small armed force rather than a single individual. It was gratifying to know his efforts were being appreciated. The first alien died when Marcus dropped through the ventilation grate directly above him, driving the molecular blade through the gap in his exoskeleton at the base of his skull. The creature's enhanced physiology meant it took several seconds to die, during which it managed to trigger an alarm before collapsing. The second alien spun and fired in a single, smooth motion, proving that Zephyrian reflexes were indeed impressive. Marcus had anticipated this, throwing himself into a role that brought him behind a large piece of engineering equipment just as plasma bolts seared the air where he had been standing. The alien advanced cautiously, weapon trained on Marcus's cover position. Its tactics were sound: maintain distance, use superior firepower to flush the target into the open, eliminate with prejudice. Unfortunately for the alien, it was thinking like a conventional soldier facing another conventional soldier. Marcus was thinking like a SEAL. The engineering section was filled with pipes, conduits, and massive machinery that hummed with barely contained energy. Marcus had spent the first few minutes of his observation identifying what everything did based on its position and connections. The large cylindrical device he was hiding behind appeared to be part of the ship's power distribution network, carrying enormous amounts of energy to various ship systems. He armed one of the alien grenades, not to throw it, but to use its timer mechanism. 30 seconds. More than enough time. While the Zephyrian warrior methodically advanced, Marcus used his molecular blade to carefully slice through specific power conduits. The trick was to create a feedback loop that would overload the safety systems without immediately shutting down the entire network. It required precise cuts at exactly the right locations, the kind of technical sabotage that SEALs train for extensively. At the 20-second mark, the engineering section's lighting began to flicker. The advancing alien paused, recognizing that something was wrong, but not understanding what the human had done. That moment of hesitation was exactly what Marcus needed. He rolled out from behind cover, not toward the alien, but away from it, diving behind another piece of machinery just as the power overload reached critical mass. The cylindrical device he had been hiding behind exploded with spectacular effect, filling the air with superheated plasma and electromagnetic interference. The alien warrior's exoskeleton was designed to withstand energy weapons and physical impacts. It was not designed to function properly when subjected to massive electromagnetic pulses that scrambled its internal systems. The creature found itself temporarily blinded and disoriented, its enhanced reflexes useless when it couldn't determine which direction threats were coming from. Marcus ended its confusion with a plasma rifle burst to the head at close range. 2 down, 6 to go. The explosion had caused secondary damage throughout the engineering section, and alarms were now blaring throughout the ship. Marcus could hear heavy footsteps converging on his position as the remaining crew responded to the emergency. He had perhaps 2 minutes before they arrived in force. He used that time to examine the alien technology more carefully. The personal shield generator was surprisingly compact and operated on principles he recognized from human research into defensive systems. The plasma rifles were remarkably efficient, using a miniaturized fusion reaction to create bolts of superheated matter. Most interesting were the communication devices each alien carried, which appear to be linked directly to their nervous systems. That gave him an idea that was either brilliant or suicidal. Possibly both. Marcus carefully removed the communication implant from one of the dead aliens, ignoring the alien's eye core that coated his hands. Human genetic modification had given him an enhanced immune system, but he still had no idea what kind of diseases these creatures might carry. That was a problem for later, assuming there was a later. The implant was designed to interface directly with Zephyr neural pathways, but Marcus had spent years working with adaptive technology. Every SEAL carried universal interface gear for exactly this kind of situation. With some careful modification using tools from the engineering section, he managed to create a connection that would allow him to access their communication network. The sensation was immediately disorienting. Suddenly, he could hear not just the aliens' voices, but their tactical data streams, their sensory feeds, even fragments of their thoughts and emotional states. The technology was far more advanced than anything humans had developed, creating a network consciousness that allowed for unprecedented coordination between team members. It also meant that when Marcus spoke into the network, every surviving alien on the ship heard him as clearly as if he were standing next to them. "Commander Zach-TH," Marcus said, his words transmitted directly into the minds of his enemies. "This is your 8 o'clock wake-up call." The effect was immediate chaos. The aliens had never experienced an enemy who could access their private communications, much less inject thoughts directly into their neural networks. Several of them began firing wildly at shadows, convinced that the human was somehow inside their heads. In a sense, he was. Marcus could see their positions now, marked as glowing indicators in his modified vision interface. 6 aliens, including Commander Zach-TH, spread throughout the ship in a standard search pattern. Their emotional states were visible to him as well: confusion, anger, and, for the first time, something that might have been fear. "You want to know something interesting about humans, Commander?" Marcus continued, using the communication network to project his voice throughout the ship while he moved through the corridors toward his next target. "We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We know every dirty trick, every psychological warfare technique, every way to break an enemy's will to fight." 3 decks above, he could sense Commander Zach-TH's growing rage mixed with genuine concern. The alien commander was beginning to understand that this was not a conventional military engagement. This was something his training had never prepared him for. "The thing about being apex predators," Marcus said as he positioned himself outside the quarters where 2 aliens had taken defensive positions, "is that you never learn how to handle being hunted." He could feel their confusion and growing panic through the neural link. These warriors had conquered dozens of species, but they had always fought conventional battles against conventional enemies. They had never faced an opponent who treated warfare as a form of psychological torture, who used their own technology against them, who seemed to understand their capabilities better than they did. Marcus armed his last energy grenade and smiled grimly. The hunt was going exactly as planned, but the real lesson was just beginning. These aliens thought they understood human military capabilities based on their encounters with colonial defense forces and regular Navy units. They had no idea what a single motivated human could accomplish when trained in the full spectrum of unconventional warfare. And they were about to find out why humans had dominated their own world long before they reached the stars. The grenade rolled into the aliens' defensive position with perfect timing, and Marcus prepared to demonstrate the next principle of human military doctrine. When fighting a superior enemy, victory goes to whoever is willing to be more creative with violence. Commander Zach-TH stood in the bridge of the Shadow Fong, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the emergency lighting in fractured patterns across the control surfaces. Around him, the few remaining crew members worked frantically to track their invisible enemy, but their efforts were yielding nothing but frustration. The human had vanished from their sensors completely, as if he had never existed. That was impossible, of course. No biological entity could avoid the Shadow Fang's detection systems, which could track individual heartbeats through 3 decks of military-grade armor plating. Yet somehow, this single human had not only disappeared, but was continuing to eliminate his crew with methodical precision. The explosion in the crew quarters had claimed 2 more of his warriors. That left only 4 Zephyrians alive aboard the ship, including himself. 4 elite Void Hunters, each worth a squadron of regular infantry, reduced to cowering behind blast doors while a single human picked them off one by one. "Commander," his tactical officer Veltar reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The human has somehow integrated with our communication network. He's accessing our tactical data and possibly our sensory feeds." Zach-TH's mandibles clicked in agitation. That should have been impossible as well. Zephyrian neural interface technology was specifically designed to be incompatible with other species' biological systems. The fact that this human had not only accessed their network, but was using it against them suggested capabilities far beyond standard intelligence estimates. "Shut down all neural links," Zach-TH ordered. "Return to basic communication protocols." "Sir," Veltar hesitated. "Without network coordination, our tactical effectiveness will be severely compromised." "Our tactical effectiveness is already compromised," Zach-TH snarled. "This human is using our own advantages against us. We adapt or we die." Through the bridge's armored viewports, space looked deceptively peaceful. Stars wheeled slowly as the ship maintained its patrol orbit around the destroyed human colony. Less than an hour ago, Zach-TH had been congratulating himself on another successful extermination mission. Now he was fighting for survival against a single enemy he couldn't even locate. The communication system crackled to life, and Marcus Rodriguez's voice filled the bridge with casual menace. "You know, Commander, I've been thinking about your species' approach to warfare. Very systematic, very logical. You identify targets, apply overwhelming force, eliminate resistance. It's actually quite similar to how humans conduct pest control." Zach-TH refused to respond, but he could see the psychological effect the human's words were having on his remaining crew. These were warriors bred for conquest, not the kind of protracted psychological warfare this enemy was conducting. "The difference," Marcus continued, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere, "is that pests eventually develop resistance. They adapt. They learn to fight back. And when they do, the exterminator sometimes becomes the exterminated." A new alarm began blaring throughout the ship. Veltar's hands flew over his control panel, his expression growing increasingly alarmed. "Commander, we're detecting massive power fluctuations in the primary reactor core. Something is interfering with the containment fields." Zach-TH felt his blood turn cold. The reactor core was located in the most heavily shielded section of the ship, accessible only through multiple security checkpoints and blast doors. Even if the human had somehow reached that area, the radiation levels would kill any unprotected biological entity within seconds. "How is that possible?" Zach-TH demanded. "Unknown, sir. The power fluctuations are subtle, but increasing. If they continue at this rate, we'll experience a containment failure within 30 minutes. Marcus's voice cut through their conversation with what sounded like genuine interest. "Fascinating design, by the way. Your reactor uses a magnetic bottle containment system similar to human fusion reactors, but with some interesting modifications. The safety interlocks are particularly clever, very difficult to disable from the outside." Zach-TH realized with growing horror what the human was implying. "You're inside the reactor chamber." "Well, technically I'm outside the reactor chamber," Marcus corrected conversationally. "I'm in the maintenance tunnels that run alongside the containment field generators. Turns out your radiation shielding works both ways. Keeps radiation in, but also keeps your sensor from detecting what's hiding in the gaps." The tactical officer's panel lit up with additional warnings. "Sir, he's systematically destabilizing the magnetic field alignment. If he continues, the containment bottle will collapse. That would destroy the entire ship," Zach-TH pointed out, speaking directly to their tormentor. "You would die along with the rest of us." There was a pause before Marcus responded, and when he did, his voice carried a note of cold satisfaction. "Commander, I think you're still not understanding the situation. This isn't a battle for territory or resources. This isn't even really about military objectives. This is about sending a message. What message? Zach TH found himself asking despite his determination to maintain silence. The message is simple, Marcus replied. Humans don't surrender. We don't submit. We don't go quietly into extinction. And when you push us far enough, we stop caring about our own survival as long as we can take you with us. Veltar looked up from his controls, his face pale with fear. Commander, I'm detecting movement in the reactor control chamber. He's accessing the primary control systems. Zach TH made a decision that went against every principle of Void Hunter doctrine. Abandon ship. All crew to the escape pods immediately. Sir, that's an order. Zach TH snapped. This human has demonstrated capabilities beyond our ability to counter. We evacuate and call in a full battle squadron to deal with this threat. As his remaining crew began their evacuation procedures, Zach TH found himself speaking directly to their enemy again. You cannot escape this ship, human. Even if you prevent our evacuation, you will die when the reactor fails. You're probably right. Marcus agreed cheerfully. But here's what you don't understand, Commander. I've been dead since the moment I accepted this mission. Everything since then has just been borrowed time. And I intend to make every second count. Zach TH could hear the escape pods launching as his crew abandoned the ship. Within moments, he would be alone aboard the Shadow Fawn with a suicidal human who had somehow gained control of their most critical systems. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to preserve himself for future battles. Instead, he found himself walking toward the reactor chamber. It took him 10 minutes to reach the heavily armored blast door that protected the ship's power core. The radiation warnings were already severe, and his exoskeleton's protection systems were working overtime to filter out the increasingly dangerous energy levels. Through the transparent aluminum viewing port, he could see the reactor itself, a brilliant sun contained within invisible magnetic fields. And there, silhouetted against the reactor's glare, was the human. Marcus Rodriguez looked exactly like what he was, a predator designed by evolution and enhanced by technology to be the perfect killer. He moved through the maintenance area with casual confidence, his hands working steadily at control panels that should have been impossible for any non-Zephyrian to operate. The radiation that was straining Zach TH's protective systems seemed to have no effect on him whatsoever. Ow! Zach TH asked through the blast door's communication system. Marcus looked up and smiled, his teeth visible through the faceplate of what Zach TH now realized was a sophisticated radiation suit of human manufacture. Military Technology Commander. We've been working on rad-hard equipment since before we left Earth. When you're planning to fight in space, you prepare for every possible environment. You came here specifically to destroy this ship. I came here to learn about your capabilities and eliminate high-value targets. Marcus corrected. Destroying the ship is just a bonus. Although I have to say, your reactor design is impressively efficient. We'll definitely want to study the wreckage. Zach TH felt a chill that had nothing to do with the environmental controls. Wreckage? The explosion will vaporize everything within 100 kilometers. No, it won't, Marcus said patiently, as if explaining something to a child. See, I'm not actually going to cause a containment failure. That would waste all this lovely technology. Instead, I'm going to create a controlled shutdown that will disable your ship without destroying it. Then, my people will arrive to collect everything for analysis. The alien commander stared at the human in complete bewilderment. Your people? There are no human ships in this system. We destroyed them all. Marcus's smile widened. You destroyed the ones you could detect. Stealth technology has come a long way since you started your extermination campaign. There's a full strike force waiting in the outer system for my signal. As if summoned by his words, the ship's long-range sensors began detecting new contacts. Dozens of them, appearing seemingly out of nowhere as their stealth systems deactivated. Human ships, moving in perfect formation toward the disabled Shadow Fawn. You see, Commander, Marcus continued, his hands still working steadily at the control panels. This was never about one seal against one alien ship. This was about demonstrating that humans can adapt faster than you can evolve your tactics. Every trick you've used against our colonies, every advantage you thought you had, we've been studying it all, learning from it, preparing our response. Zach TH watched in fascination and horror as the human completed his modifications to the reactor systems. The magnetic containment fields began shifting, not collapsing, but reconfiguring themselves into a new pattern that would safely shut down the reaction while preserving all the ship's technology for human analysis. The message you wanted to send, Zach TH said slowly. This is it. Part of it, Marcus agreed. The other part is what happens when your empire realizes that an entire Void Hunter crew was eliminated by a single human using nothing but improvised tactics and capture equipment. How do you think that will affect their threat assessment protocols? The answer was obvious, and it filled Zach TH with a cold dread that penetrated even his engineered warrior's conditioning. The Empire would be forced to completely revise their understanding of human military capabilities. Resources that had been allocated to other campaigns would be redirected to deal with this unexpected threat level. Most importantly, the systematic extermination of human colonies would be halted while new tactics were developed, which would give humanity time to prepare their own response. You planned this entire engagement, Zach TH realized, from the moment we found your body in space. Welcome to asymmetric warfare, Commander, Marcus said as the reactor finally shut down and the ship's emergency lighting activated. Population advantage, technological superiority, military doctrine, none of that matters when your enemy is willing to sacrifice everything to buy time for their species to adapt. Through the ship's communication system, they could hear human voices as boarding parties began their systematic capture of Zephyrian technology. In the distance, escape pods were being tractored aboard human vessels for interrogation and study. Marcus looked directly at Zach TH through the blast door viewing port. Your empire made one critical error, Commander. You assumed that because humans were easy to kill individually, we would be easy to eliminate as a species. What you didn't account for was that we've spent our entire evolutionary history learning how to be the most dangerous thing in any environment we enter. As human soldiers in full combat armor began cutting through the blast door, Zach TH found himself asking one final question. What happens to my crew? To me. Marcus considered this seriously. You'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention, assuming it applies to non-human combatants. Probably end up in a research facility while our xenobiologists figure out how your species works. Could be worse. At least you'll be alive to see how this war ends. The blast door finally gave way, and Zach TH found himself facing a squad of human soldiers whose equipment and bearing suggested they were every bit as elite as the Void Hunters had been. But there was something in their eyes that the Zephyrians had never possessed, the look of predators who had evolved in an environment where everything was trying to kill them. As they secured him with professional efficiency, Zach TH realized that his species had made a fundamental miscalculation about humanity. They had assumed that because humans were individually vulnerable, they would respond to existential threats the way most species did, with panic, desperation, and ultimately submission. Instead, humans had responded by becoming more dangerous than their enemies had thought possible. And now the war would continue with a completely different balance of power. The hunt, as the human had said, was indeed far from over. 3 months after the capture of the Shadow Fong, Marcus Rodriguez stood in the briefing room of the UES Retribution, humanity's newest and most advanced warship. Around him, the assembled commanders of the Human Defense Fleet studied holographic displays showing the current state of the war against the Zephyrian Empire. The news was not encouraging. Intelligence reports indicate the Empire has withdrawn from all forward positions and consolidated their forces around their core systems. Admiral Sarachin reported, her weathered face grim in the blue light of the tactical displays. They've completely revised their assessment of human military capabilities and are treating us as a Level 9 threat. Captain Maria Santos whistled low. Level 9. That's reserved for species that pose existential threats to the Empire itself. It gets worse, Admiral Chun continued. They've begun implementing what their communications refer to as the Purification Protocol. Complete sterilization of any system that might harbor human survivors, using long-range bombardment to avoid direct contact. Marcus felt a familiar cold anger settling in his chest. The Purification Protocol was exactly what he had hoped to prevent by demonstrating human capabilities aboard the Shadow Fawn. Instead, his success had apparently convinced the Zephyrians that humanity was too dangerous to fight conventionally. How many colonies have we lost? He asked. 17 in the past month, Admiral Chen replied. Each one completely eliminated from orbit before any evacuation was possible. The Empire has decided that direct engagement with human forces is too costly. They're choosing to eliminate us through systematic genocide conducted from safe distances. The holographic display shifted to show the current disposition of human forces. It was a depressingly small collection of ships and bases scattered across a handful of star systems, facing an enemy with resources spanning thousands of worlds. "What about the technology we recovered from the Shadow Fong?" asked Commander Torres, the fleet's chief technical officer. "Has the analysis yielded anything useful?" Admiral Chen's expression brightened slightly. "Actually, yes. Dr. Kim, would you brief us on the research findings?" Dr. Elizabeth Kim stepped forward, her hands dancing over the control interface as new displays materialized. "The Zephyrian technology is remarkably advanced, but it's built on principles we can understand and adapt. Their plasma weapons, shield systems, and faster-than-light drives all have applications for human military technology. The question," Admiral Chen interrupted, "is whether we can implement these advances quickly enough to matter. The Empire has over 1,000 ships in their reserve fleet alone. Even with technological parity, we're still facing impossible odds." Marcus had been listening to variations of this conversation for weeks. The strategic situation was clear. Humanity was losing badly, and traditional military solutions were insufficient. But Marcus had spent his entire career finding ways to win impossible fights, and he had some ideas that the conventional military leadership might find uncomfortable. "With respect, Admiral," he said, "I think we're approaching this problem incorrectly." The room fell silent. As a Master Chief, Marcus was technically junior to most of the officers present, but his success aboard the Shadow Fong had given him considerable influence in strategic planning sessions. "Explain," Admiral Chen said simply. Marcus moved to the holographic display and began highlighting specific systems. "We're thinking like a conventional military force, trying to win a conventional war. But we're not a conventional military force, and this isn't a conventional war. We're insurgents fighting an occupation force that has superior numbers, technology, and resources." "That's an interesting perspective," Captain Santos said slowly. "But insurgencies require local population support, supply lines, and safe havens. We don't have any of those advantages, don't we?" Marcus asked. "The Zephyrian Empire spans thousands of worlds, with millions of ships maintaining order across their territory. They have infrastructure, supply lines, and civilian populations that are completely vulnerable to asymmetric attacks." Admiral Chen leaned forward. "You're suggesting we take the war to their home systems." "I'm suggesting we stop trying to defend fixed positions against a superior enemy and start attacking targets they can't afford to lose," Marcus corrected. "Industrial facilities, research stations, command centers. Make them spread their forces thin, protecting everything instead of concentrating them for systematic extermination campaigns." Dr. Kim looked up from her research displays. "The technology we've recovered from the Shadow Fong could support this kind of operation. We've identified vulnerabilities in their sensor networks, communication systems, and defensive protocols." Commander Torres nodded thoughtfully. "Small, fast ships using stealth technology and enhanced weapon systems. Hit and run attacks against high-value targets. It could work, but we need crews willing to accept extremely high casualty rates." "There are volunteers," Admiral Chen said quietly. "More than we can use, actually. Every survivor from the destroyed colonies has requested combat assignments." Marcus understood that motivation completely. When your family, friends, and entire civilization were being systematically exterminated, the desire for revenge became a powerful force. The trick was channeling that desire into effective military action. "I want to propose something specific," Marcus said, calling up new displays that showed deep space reconnaissance data. "The Zephyrians have a major industrial complex in the Kepler 618 system. It produces the specialized components for their plasma weapons. If we could destroy or capture it, we could significantly degrade their military capabilities while gaining access to manufacturing technology. The system is heavily defended," Captain Santos pointed out. "Long-range scans show at least 50 warships and extensive orbital defense platforms. Exactly, Marcus agreed, which is why they won't be expecting a small infiltration team to attack the industrial complex directly. Admiral Chun studied the tactical data for several minutes before responding. This would be essentially a suicide mission. Even if the team successfully destroyed the facility, extraction would be nearly impossible. Not necessarily, Dr. Kim interjected. The Zephyr manufacturing complex includes experimental faster-than-light communication equipment. If we could capture it intact, the intelligence value would be enormous. Worth the risk of a rescue mission. Marcus could see the Admiral weighing the options. It was a desperate plan, but desperate situations called for desperate measures. And there was a precedent for this kind of operation working against seemingly impossible odds. How many people would you need? Admiral Chun asked finally. 12. Marcus answered immediately. A full SEAL team with specialized training in zero-gravity combat and technical infiltration. We go in using captured Zephyrian ships, hit the facility during a shift change when security is minimal, and extract with whatever intelligence and technology we can carry. And if extraction isn't possible? Marcus met her gaze steadily. Then we make sure the facility is completely destroyed and take as many enemies with us as we can. But, Admiral, I don't think that's how this ends. The Zephyrians have been fighting conventional wars against conventional enemies for centuries. They've never faced humans who are specifically trained for this kind of operation. The room was quiet as the assembled officers considered the proposal. Marcus could see the doubt in their faces, the reluctance to approve what might be another suicide mission. But he could also see something else, the growing realization that conventional tactics were failing and humanity needed to try something different. There's another consideration, Admiral Chun said slowly. If this operation succeeds, it could change the entire dynamic of the war. The Empire would be forced to divert significant resources to protecting their industrial infrastructure instead of focusing on colony extermination. And if it fails, Captain Santos added, we lose our best special operations team and confirm to the Zephyrians that direct attacks on their core systems are ineffective. The risk-reward calculation is clear, Marcus said. We're losing this war with current tactics. We need to try something that has the potential to shift the balance of power, even if the odds of success are low. Dr. Kim stepped forward. I'd like to volunteer for the technical aspects of the mission. The Zephyrian technology is complex, and having someone who understands it could be crucial for capturing their advanced systems. Absolutely not, Admiral Chen replied immediately. You're too valuable to risk on a field operation. With respect, Admiral, Dr. Kim said firmly, we're all too valuable to lose, but we're going to lose anyway if we don't take risks. This mission needs someone who can identify and extract the most important technological components under combat conditions. Marcus found himself respecting the scientist's determination. It took courage to volunteer for what everyone knew was probably a one-way trip. She's right, Admiral. We need someone who can make tactical decisions about what technology to prioritize if we can't take everything. Admiral Chen looked around the room, reading the faces of her senior officers. Slowly, reluctantly, she nodded. Very well. Operation, what are we calling this? Marcus smiled grimly. Operation Payback. Because it's time the Zephyrians learned what happens when you try to exterminate a species that specializes in creative violence. 3 weeks later, Marcus and his team were aboard a captured Zephyrian transport ship, modified with human technology, and approaching the Kepler 618 system using falsified identification codes. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and probably impossible. But as Marcus checked his equipment and reviewed the mission parameters one final time, he felt the familiar calm confidence that came with knowing he was doing exactly what he had been trained to do. The Zephyrians had made the mistake of treating this as a conventional military campaign. They were about to learn that when humans went to war, they brought their own rules. The Kepler 618 industrial complex was a marvel of Zephyrian engineering, stretching across 3 orbital platforms connected by massive structural bridges. Each platform specialized in different aspects of weapons manufacturing, from raw material processing to final assembly. The entire complex employed over 50,000 workers and produced enough plasma weapons to equip a dozen fleets. Marcus Rodriguez floated in the cargo bay of their captured transport ship, watching the facility grow larger through the viewport. Around him, 11 other members of SEAL Team 7 performed final equipment checks with the mechanical precision of warriors who knew they might not survive the next few hours. Identification verified. Came the voice of Petty Officer Jackson from the pilot station. Traffic control is directing us to docking Bay 7 on the primary platform. Looks like our forged credentials are holding up. Dr. Elizabeth Kim looked up from her portable scanner, her face pale but determined. I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the manufacturing areas. The plasma containment systems alone are worth capturing if we can manage it. We stick to the plan, Marcus reminded the team through their private communication network. Primary objective is to destroy the facility's weapons production capability. Secondary objective is intelligence gathering. Tertiary objective is survival and extraction. Everyone clear on priorities? 11 voices acknowledged the mission parameters. These are volunteers from across the fleet, each chosen for specific skills that would be needed for the operation. Demolitions experts, computer specialists, combat medics, and weapons technicians. The best of the best, willing to risk everything for a chance to strike back at humanity's enemies. The transport ship settled into its assigned docking bay with mechanical precision. Through the viewports, Marcus could see Zephyrian workers moving around the facility with the casual confidence of people who had never experienced a military threat to their workplace. Security appeared minimal, just as their intelligence had suggested. Remember, Marcus said as the team prepared to disembark, we're supposed to be delivering raw materials for the morning shift. Act bored, stay together, and don't do anything that might attract attention until we reach the primary manufacturing floor. The first phase of the mission went exactly according to plan. Their forged identification held up under casual inspection, and the Zephyrian dock workers were too focused on their own tasks to pay much attention to another delivery crew. Marcus's team moved through the facility's corridors with practiced nonchalance, their concealed weapons and explosives undetected by security systems designed to screen for conventional threats. The industrial complex was impressive, Marcus had to admit. The Zephyrians had created a manufacturing environment that was both efficient and elegant, with smooth-flowing production lines that turned raw materials into finished weapons with minimal waste. Under different circumstances, he might have appreciated the engineering accomplishment. Target area in sight, reported Sergeant Martinez through their tactical network. Manufacturing floor is operating at full capacity. I count approximately 200 workers and maybe 20 security personnel. Marcus could see the plasma weapons production line through a transparent aluminum viewing wall. Robotic systems worked alongside Zephyrian technicians to assemble the energy rifles that had been used to slaughter human colonists for months. The sight filled him with cold determination. Dr. Kim, are you identifying the technology we need? Yes, she replied, her scanner working constantly. The plasma containment field generators are located in the central processing area. If we can extract the control systems intact, it could revolutionize human energy weapon capabilities. Demolitions team, are the charges ready? Affirmative, came the response from Petty Officer Thompson. Tactical nuclear devices are armed and ready. We can bring down the entire platform if necessary. Marcus checked his chronometer. They had been aboard the facility for exactly 18 minutes, and so far everything was proceeding smoothly. Almost too smoothly, which made him nervous. In his experience, operations that went this well were usually walking into an ambush. Control, this is Reaper 1, he said into his long-range communicator. We are in position and ready to execute primary objectives. Copy, Reaper 1, came Admiral Chen's voice from the Fleet Command ship hidden in the outer system. You are cleared for all mission objectives. Good hunting. Marcus smiled grimly. Time to remind the Zephyrians why humans had earned their reputation as the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The first security guard died when Marcus stepped around a corner and broke his neck with a single efficient motion. The second guard turned toward the sound of his partner's body hitting the deck and found himself face-to-face with 11 humans in full combat gear. Light them up, Marcus ordered. What followed could barely be called a battle. The Zephyrian security forces were trained to handle industrial accidents and minor civil disturbances, not coordinated military assault by special forces operators. Marcus's team moved through the facility like a force of nature, eliminating resistance with surgical precision while moving toward their primary objectives. Dr. Kim worked frantically to download technical specifications from the plasma manufacturing systems, while the rest of the team established a defensive perimeter. "I need 5 more minutes," she called out over the sound of weapons fire echoing through the corridors. "You've got it," Marcus replied, reloading his plasma rifle with ammunition taken from dead security guards. "But after that, we need to be ready for serious opposition." He was right. The facility's emergency systems had finally activated, and Marcus could hear the distinctive sound of military shuttles approaching from the nearby defense platforms. Whatever response force the Zephyrians were sending would be considerably more competent than the industrial security they had faced so far. "Charges are set on the primary manufacturing equipment," reported Thompson. 1 minute to detonation. "Kim, time's up," Marcus called. "Got it," she replied, disconnecting her equipment from the alien systems. "I've downloaded everything I can carry. The technical specifications alone are worth the entire operation." Marcus felt a moment of satisfaction. Whatever happened next, they had accomplished their primary mission objectives. The facility would be destroyed, and humanity would gain access to advanced weapons technology that could change the balance of the war. "All teams, prepare for extraction," he ordered, leading his people toward the docking bay where their transport ship waited. That was when everything went wrong. The docking bay blast doors slammed shut as they approached, and Marcus realized that their escape route had been compromised. Emergency lighting bathed everything in harsh red light, and alarm klaxons echoed through the corridors. Worst of all, he could hear the sound of armored boots approaching from multiple directions. "Trap," he said simply into his communicator. "They knew we were coming?" asked Jackson. "They suspected," Marcus corrected, thinking rapidly. "Probably increased security after the Shadowfang incident. The question is whether they know exactly who we are and what we're trying to accomplish." His answer came in the form of a voice speaking in perfect English through the facility's communication system. "Humans of the terrorist organization calling itself SEAL Team 7, the voice said with cold authority. "You are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender immediately, and you will be treated according to military protocols. Continue your resistance, and you will be eliminated." Marcus exchanged glances with his team. The Zephyrians not only knew who they were, but had apparently been waiting for them to arrive. This wasn't a security response. It was a carefully planned counter-operation. "How many?" he asked Thompson. "Thermal scans show approximately 50 hostiles converging on our position," Thompson replied. "Armed and armored. Probably void hunters." Marcus considered their options. They were trapped in a manufacturing facility with no obvious escape route, facing professional warriors who knew exactly what they were dealing with. Their explosives were armed and would detonate regardless of what happened to them, ensuring the mission's primary objective would be met. But Marcus had not come this far to simply die deceitfully. He had come to win. "Dr. Kim," he said, "that plasma containment technology you downloaded. How dangerous would it be if someone destabilized it?" She looked at him with growing understanding. "Very dangerous. The energy levels involved could probably take out this entire orbital platform. What about the other 2 platforms? If the explosion was large enough and properly directed." She paused to calculate. "Yes, it could cause a cascade failure that would destroy the entire complex." Marcus smiled the cold, predatory expression that had terrified enemies across a dozen worlds. "Then, let's give them a demonstration of human engineering principles." 20 minutes later, Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching through long-range sensors as the Kepler 618 industrial complex died in a spectacular explosion of light and energy. The blast was visible even from the outer system, a brief new star that illuminated the faces of every human in the fleet. "Any word from Reaper Team?" she asked quietly. "Negative," replied the communications officer. "Last transmission was 18 minutes ago, confirming mission objectives achieved." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. 12 of humanity's best warriors had just sacrificed themselves to strike a critical blow against the Zephyrian Empire. The industrial complex had produced nearly 20% of the Empire's advanced weapons, and its destruction would force them to revise their entire strategic timeline. More importantly, the technical data Dr. Kim had transmitted before the explosion would allow human scientists to develop their own plasma weapons technology. For the first time since the war began, humanity had gained a significant technological advantage. "Admiral," called the sensor technician, excitement evident in his voice. I'm detecting an emergency beacon from the Kepler 618 system. Human origin. Admiral Chun felt her heart skip. On screen, the holographic display showed a battered emergency pod drifting in space near the debris field that had once been the orbital complex. Faint life signs were visible, and the beacon carried a familiar identification code. "It's them," she whispered. Somehow they survived. When the rescue shuttle returned 2 hours later, Marcus Rodriguez was unconscious but alive, along with 3 other members of his team. Dr. Kim had suffered severe radiation exposure, but was expected to recover. The others had died in the explosion, their sacrifice ensuring that the survivors could escape in an emergency pod that had been hidden aboard their transport ship. As the medical teams worked to stabilize the survivors, Admiral Chen found herself looking at preliminary reports from the intelligence division. The data recovered from the Zephyrian facility was beyond their most optimistic projections. Weapons technology, manufacturing processes, strategic planning documents, even political intelligence about the Empire's internal structure. But, most importantly, they had discovered something that changed everything about humanity's understanding of the war. The Zephyrian Empire was not the unified, monolithic entity they had appeared to be. Internal documents revealed significant political divisions, resource shortages, and growing opposition to the costly extermination campaign against humanity. The Empire's leadership was under increasing pressure to achieve rapid victory before their own population began questioning the war's necessity. Marcus Rodriguez had done more than destroy a weapons facility. He had given humanity its first real hope of victory in a war that had seemed impossible to win. 6 months later, human fleets equipped with captured Zephyrian technology began their own offensive operations. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted. Humanity had demonstrated that they could not only survive the Empire's attempts at extermination, but could strike back with devastating effectiveness. And in the deepest reaches of space, where survivors of destroyed colonies had established hidden bases, recruitment centers began training a new generation of warriors. Not conventional soldiers, but specialists in asymmetric warfare who understood that when facing a superior enemy, victory belonged to whoever was willing to be more creative with violence. The Zephyrian Empire had started a war of extermination against humanity. They were about to discover that humans had been practicing extermination for millennia before they reached the stars, and were very, very good at it. The hunt would continue, but now the hunters and the hunted had switched places.